Time now for our news review segment, where we take a look at one of our stories in more detail. Former US President Donald Trump has once again unleashed a litany of claims of voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election.
Why aren't they investigating November 3rd, a rigged and stolen election, without getting to the bottom of which we will never have a fair and free democracy? Why aren't they looking at that?
Trump made the remarks during a rally in Florence County in the state of Arizona. He called the storming of the Capitol by his supporters on January 6, 2021, quote, a protest against a crooked election. He also took the opportunity to hit his successor, Joe Biden, saying his administration is incompetent. Trump's supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol in the hope of preventing lawmakers from certifying Biden's victory, but to no avail. Angry protesters then clashed with police and tried to beat up a number of Democratic lawmakers. They also damaged parts of the building housing both wings of Congress. Joining us is Tony Gosling. He's a historian and journalist from the British city of Bristol, and also Paul Sheldon Foote, a professor at California State University from Irvine. Gentlemen, welcome. Tony, if I start with you, what do you make of the timing of this? Trump, is it perhaps due to a lack of, Biden, his lack of popularity in the poll that has raised some questions? And what are the chances, do you think, of Trump being re-elected in any form, or a candidate endorsed by him being re-elected?
Well, look, this is going back a year or so into Biden's presidency, and of course that's why this is being discussed again now. It's a year, an anniversary, really. But I think everyone is looking now at Biden. What did he promise? What's being delivered? Well, lots of promises, particularly to do with the Iran nuclear deal, nothing being delivered there. We've got union leaders in the United States this week talking about how they backed Biden, but now they're wondering why they did it, because there seems to be workers' conditions have actually got worse over for the people who are paying their wages, the union members. And also you now got in the US inflation hitting a 40-year high. Now this eats in day by day, week by week into workers' wages, and it means that people simply cannot afford, they have less and less money in their pocket to live every week. They've got supply chain problems with some of the supermarkets not being able to stock their shelves properly in the United States. We've just had the voters' rights bill, which was a key plank of the Biden promise to get in.
Tony, I'm going to ask you just to hold that thought for just 1 minute, because there's so much to discuss. I just want to get it all in. Paul, if I just turn to you, Professor, Trump left office a year ago, yet polarization remains, division remains in the United States. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, the Democrats are revealing their true faces. In 2016, when Hillary Clinton was running against Trump, she called half Americans deplorables. It cost her the election. A few days ago in Georgia, the President Biden called half Americans domestic enemies, terrorists, and traitors and racists. Tulsi Gabbard, former Democrat who ran against President Biden for the nomination, even tweeted that this was outrageous and too much. He couldn't believe what he was doing. So we've got a president who campaigned on the promise that he would bring America together, and has taken off his mask and revealed his real face, that he wants to be a totalitarian. And on top of what your previous speaker mentioned, on top of that, it would be even worse for the Democrats at the moment, except for Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat, who has stopped them from a massive tax increase and spending bill. And now they're trying to work with a Democrat to convince him to agree to something so they can get us into even worse deficit spending and spur on even more inflation.
Okay, so Tony, we've just heard from Bernie Sanders, who says class warfare in America is intensifying. Greed is on the rise. Our opponents want us to feel weak, and he's calling on his supporters to build an unstoppable movement. With so much polarization, again, what impact will that have on future elections, which many have claimed that the past one, the previous presidential one, was rigged?
Well, look, a key fact here, which very few networks around the world have been discussing, is the fact that in the storming of the White House, so-called storming of the White House, on the storming of Washington a year ago, what we saw was a lot of the fences that were normally put in front of the buildings, weren't there that day. There was also a very, very normal and understandable sentiment behind the people who were doing it, and that is that the United States democracy is not functioning, it's not working, and it's not working for the people. It's working for the deep state, it's working for a super wealthy oligarchy who are doing extremely well. The billionaires are increasing at a rate of knots, but it's not working, and so that's why. But when it comes to Trump standing again, and when it comes to these statements he's been making, I think he's quite justified in putting his position, because we haven't seen a lot of change at all. Certainly not for ordinary working people in the United States at all. In fact, the wealth divide that Biden promised to bring together the rich and the poor, that is, in other words, to tax the rich and give some of that money back in government services, public services, to the poor, and make sure that the disposable income people have in the United States goes further. They have more money in their pocket. It's just simply not happened. And so what people have voted for, again, has not been delivered, in which case, of course, the US public are likely to, basically vote on Biden out at the next election, just simply because he's not done his job. So there'll be a reaction against him. And this, I'm afraid, is the course. Hang on. The course in the West here is that we are voting for the least bad prime minister or president. It shouldn't be like that. We should be voting for positive candidates who can make a positive change, who are committed to the people, and that's simply not happening in the West anymore.
Okay, Professor Foote, we're seeing more and more analysts, more and more news reports in the United States itself talking about the risks of a civil war breaking out. What are the chances of that, in your opinion? And perhaps more importantly, what chances does the US military have to handle some form of insurgency back at home?
I'm not so sure about a civil war, but I am more likely that we see more and more people moving to other states that are more favorable to their political points of view. So that is a de facto secession. So you're having people going, for example, from California or New York to Florida or some other state that's not as oppressive. So it's taking that form. There's extreme division, and it's caused by President Biden, the man who claimed he would unite Americans.
Okay, and Tony, so just picking up from where you left off, that people are not voting for the representatives that they want, but it's more of a protest vote, if you like, or lack of any positive, influential leaders. Why are there these reports and analysts speaking about the risks of a civil war?
Well, no, I don't. I think the American public at the moment, anyway, is too docile to be organised enough to have a civil war. They basically would rather just go about their day until things get really, really bad. And let's think that actually they may do, particularly because the financial system in London and Washington and Wall Street is really basically this is being kept artificially alive through the pumping in of printing money, quantitative easing. And so you've got a fake economy where most of this money just simply goes into artificially keeping share prices high, artificially keeping property prices high, and actually the manufacturing sector is sinking fast. It's very difficult to make any money doing that anymore because, for example, the Chinese are doing it much better and much more efficiently. So we've got a completely fake economy. The real danger, I think, is financial collapse. And then at that point, you may well see civil war when people simply don't have the money to feed themselves. But this is all part of the plan. The World Economic Forum's Great Reset wants this. It wants people to basically have nothing and apparently be happy. But I wonder whether Klaus Schwab might have to, in his World Economic Forum, and Prince Charles and their pals might end up with people who've got nothing and they are actually unhappy and they need to take a happy pill to stay going. That's the sort of situation that could well create civil wars in the West, and we'll see what happens down the line.
Right, a minute left, Professor. I'll give you the last point that if you want to raise. Do you want to expand on that, the crooked elections and the wealth gap?
Yes, I do. As the gentleman pointed out, the outrageous situation we have with the American economy is due in part to the willingness of foreign investors and governments to hold American debt, China being one of them. Now, in recent times, the Russians and some others have started dumping American dollars and saying we're not going to hold debt anymore. But they have enabled this kind of irresponsible economic behavior in this country. So he's absolutely correct on that.
Great stuff. Let me thank our guests for their contribution and their time. Tony Gosling there, historian and journalist. Great analysis there, as always, Tony, for joining us from the British city of Bristol. And also Paul Sheldon Foote, professor at California State University, joining us from Irvine. Thank you very much indeed. And that brings an end to another edition of the News Review.